Orbea has updated their Wild FS e-bike, and now for 2020 it comes with the new Bosch motor as well as a carbon frame up front and some nice little nifty features. The Wild FS is a bike that Orbea claim can do pretty much everything, and that's thanks to having a motor with plenty of battery life in there. The new Bosch motor gives even more assistance than the last one, and in my experience at least is even more reactive and therefore feels even better. Orbea set out to design a bike that they say climbs better than their Occam trail bike and descends better than the Rallon Enduro bike. Now the Occam is a great all-round trail bike and it climbs very well, and the Rallon is known for being excellent downhill, so it's quite a big task to make a bike that's better than both. But Orbea reckon they've done it, and on first impressions they've certainly done a decent job. Understandably, having a motor helps the Wild FS climb better than an Occam because, well, you've got a big motor there helping you with the torques and the power to the back wheel. In terms of descending, having that motor allows them to design suspension that is soft and plush and controlled without having to think too heavily about how good it pedals up a hill. And this is how they reckon they've built a bike that is better than the Occam at going up hills and better than the Rallon going down them. Having that motor also allows them to build a sturdier bike. Orbea say that around 22 kilos is the sweet spot for an e-bike, regardless of its intentions. And that's because below that you're going to have to put some lighter weight components and build the frame less sturdy to ensure that you don't hit those higher weight figures. So aiming for this 22-ish kilo weight is a pretty good way of getting decent components with a strong frame. And because you've got the motor, it's not so much of an issue, especially as the new Bosch motor gives that little bit extra power. At the heart of the Wild FS is the new Bosch Performance CX motor, and it's had a number of improvements over the previous generation. For example, the magnesium housing helps it become 25% lighter, while a more compact design means it takes up around 50% less volume. They've moved from a geared small chainring to a direct drive bigger chainring, which no doubt helps with the smoothest feel through the cranks and also aids efficiency of the motor. While at the same time they've dropped the Q factor, which moves the pedals closer together for a more natural feel on the bike. Bosch have also worked on the sensitivity of the motor, and this really is the big step up in performance in my opinion. There's very little lag to power inputs, and you can actually see the power that you're putting through the pedals yourself on the new kiosk display. A further aspect of the Bosch system is the range of batteries available. There's a 400 watt-hour battery, which is slightly smaller and lighter. There's a standard 500 watt-hour battery, and there's also the new standard 625 watt-hour battery. Because there are a range of different batteries available to put onto this bike, and you can piggyback second batteries onto the Wild FS, you have a number of different power options depending on how far you want to ride and how much weight you want to carry. This means you have a 500 watt-hour option, a 625 watt-hour option, a 900 watt-hour option if you put the 500 watt-hour battery inside and a 400 watt-hour battery piggybacked, a 1000 watt-hour option, 500, and a 1125 if you go for 625 and 500. I suspect most people will stick with the 625 watt-hour standard option, and that's what I rode when I went out to Spain to try the bike. The Wild FS has a carbon front triangle, and most models come with a carbon rear too. However, if you want to spend a little bit less, there is an alloy rear end option in there. As you can see from the bike, it has a vertically mounted shock, which is different to both the Occam and the Rallon. That's there to help with the architecture of the frame to make sure it all fits where they want it to fit, and to fit that second battery or a water bottle in there. Like most e-bikes, the battery can be removed from the bottom of the down tube. In order to keep the frame nice and stiff, they've put two struts just above the motor. They've also boosted the rear triangle to make sure that the stiffness front to rear is nice and balanced. This means bigger pivots and reinforced triangular structures at the back. Another way of keeping the frame nice and stiff is to keep the down tube as straight as possible all the way to the head tube. This causes problems when the bars are turned to 90 degrees because the fork can hit the down tube, So they've put in bump stops on the frame. Along with the bump stops is the Acros block lock headset, which limits the amount of turn you can put through the handlebars. And it limits it to 164 degrees. So there's a fair bit of turn you can get with the handlebars, which means storage wasn't too bad when I tried it with the wheel out.
It's a bit early in the morning. Techie friends.
Orbea have tagged the Wild FS with their 3x160mm concept. It's a very simple way of saying that it's got 160mm forks, 160mm rear wheel travel controlled by their concentric boost 4-bar system, and 160mm cranks. And those are there to help protect against pedal strikes when you're riding up more technical terrain. To stop cables rattling as they run down the down tube, there is a foam-backed plastic protector that separates the battery from the cables, and it kind of holds them in place. It's flexible enough that you can move it out of the way if you do want to do some cable maintenance, but it's stiff enough to hold them rattle-free. Located in the stereo tube is the key for the battery. All you have to do is twist it, unlock, drop the battery out, and put the key back in the stereo tube. You shouldn't be able to lose it, nice and neat. Finally, there is Orbea's Mayo program, and I'm a big fan of this because you can go onto their website, look at the different areas of the frame which can be coloured differently, and pick your own custom colours. It doesn't cost you anything, but it will mean you have to wait a couple of extra weeks for your bike. However, with all the different colour options on both the frame colours and the logo colours, there's over 1 million different options. So if you're a bit creative, you can pretty much guarantee that you'll be the only person with that particular colour Wild FS. Orbea are going to be offering 4 models of the Wild FS to start with. There's the top end M Limited, then there's the M Team and the M10, and they all get a carbon front triangle and a carbon rear triangle. Then there's the M20, which is carbon front and alloy rear. I rode the Wild FS M Limited, and I'll talk about that in a minute, and that comes in at £7,899 or $9,499. At the entry level is the M20 version of the Wild FS. It comes in at £5,299 or $6,299. There's a pair of DT Swiss Hybrid HX1501 Enduro e-bike ready wheels with a pair of Maxxis Minion tyres. You get a race face cockpit carbon bar, you get their own dropper post, you get a Shimano XTR 12-speed group set, as well as a E13 carbon crankset. Up front you get a Fox 36 fork with 1/6mm of travel. It's the e-bike optimised version, so a stiffer chassis, but it does come with the Grip 2 damper. The stock option on the shock is the DHX2. Now this is a coil sprung shock, and there are various different coil options for you to get when you buy the bike, so make sure you get the right one. However, Orbea do let you adjust the specs of their bikes anyway, and the bike I rode came with a Float X2, which is an air shock and therefore easier to tune. The geometry of the Wild FS is fairly middle of the road, it's fair to say. A size large has a reach of 455mm, which is reasonably short, and the chainstays are 455mm long, which is fairly long. The head angle is fairly slack at 65.5 degrees, but the seat angle is nice and steep at 76 degrees. The other downside perhaps of that shorter reach on a large is that when you're sat on longer climbs, the cockpit maybe feels a little bit cramped, and if you're going around tight switchbacks, your knees are a little bit closer to the handlebars than maybe you'd wish for. Another 10mm on the reach would be no bad thing for a size large. The extra large has a seat tube that is 483mm long with a 485mm reach, substantially bigger than the large. With a 483mm seat tube, I could just about squeeze on the bike with a 150mm dropper, meaning I could get that longer length. However, if you're much taller than me and you usually ride an extra large but want even more reach, I'm sorry, but you're not going to have much luck with the Orbea. As soon as I jumped on the Wild FS in order to vaguely set the suspension up in a slightly rough car park, the first thing I noticed was just how supple that rear suspension is. And this has a number of benefits out on the trail. First off, on the climbs, the rear wheel is stuck to the ground, which means acres of traction. With a 29 by 2.6 inch tyres on the Wild FS and that supple suspension, I never found the back end was lacking in terms of traction on loose, rocky, steppy climbs. On the way back down, the combination of a very sensitive rear suspension and the weight slung low in the bike meant it was one of the most planted e-bikes I've ridden for a long time. That super supple, reactive rear end does kind of give you that insulated from the trail sort of feel, which many people do appreciate, especially if you're riding lots of rough, rocky and rooty tracks. If you're riding smoother stuff and you want to be able to pump and pop through trails a little bit more, maybe the Wild FS isn't 100% ideal for that. However, to try it out, I did add a little bit more pressure than the sort of recommended, and I added a couple of clicks of compression to give me that little bit more support through the pedals, and it did help, obviously at the slight expense of performance on super rough, chunky stuff. Yeah. To try this out, I did jump onto an extra large bike for one of the days riding. And certainly when it was straight and steep and rough, the extra length gave plenty of stability and confidence. However, when it came to the tighter, twistier stuff, I think having that extra weight of the motor and the battery took away some of the bike's reactivity to your inputs. It's a little bit harder to get around those tighter corners and a little bit less reactive as well.
Oh my God.
That said, I do think the Wild FS is a very good trail e-bike and a reasonably good enduro e-bike too. One of the highlights though of the Wild FS is that Bosch motor, and I think Orbea have done a great job of integrating it into their bike. The sensitivity of the motor and the power it provides, not only in sort of the wattage but also the torque, makes it one of the best motors on the market. Its instant reactions to your pedal inputs makes technical climbing, which in my eyes is one of the highlights of any e-bike anyway, an absolute joy. I do think that Bosch have made arguably the best e-bike motor on the market at present, although both Shimano and Bros have got very impressive packages too. Despite my reservations with the shape and perhaps a little tweaking needed with suspension on certain trails, I do think the Wild FS is a very good e-bike, probably best suited to aggressive trail riders. Let me know what you think in the comments though. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and click the little bell to make sure that you get notifications of all of BikeRadar's new videos.